The subject we're going to try to cover is what they call old words, based on old words, such as imagination, creativity, innovative behavior. I'm going to try to describe what it is. And if you try to talk about innovative behavior without a physical referent, you're usually talking through your hat. A physical referent means if you point to a house or building, that's the subject matter you're talking about. Without a physical referent, you're not talking about anything specific. So let's try to talk about some of the old words. Imagination. You ask the average person, what do you mean by imagination? Well, to kind of think of things that are original. Really, there's no such thing. If you study everything in painting and art, music, you'll find that it has a referent. Even Bach, Toccata and Fugue in D minor, was written at a time when there was a lot of fugues written. In other words, music is rarely that original. It's based on some physical referent or some experience. Now, if you want to create imaginative drawings, say you wanted to do a lot of drawings that indicate imagination, the best thing to do is to study insect heads, study insect digits, their arms and tail, and study different types of organisms in the sea, on the land, lobsters, fish of all kinds, birds of every type. That will build within you a large file, what we call a reference file. So when you start drawing imaginative people, you can extract from all these different experiences. And you can use a grasshopper's head, a crab's claw, and you can use the hoof of dinosaurs, whatever you want. But if you don't have a broad frame of reference in your collection, you can't imagine anything. You never really imagine anything. What you do is you have a broad frame of reference. So start collecting if you want to do imaginative work. In other words, if you take pictures of different planets or what the scientists believe they look like, you'll have a larger frame of reference than trying to invent your own. Even the science fiction writers refer to other books and other writers because they themselves never come up with anything completely original. And if you use the word original, it means without a referent. I can not imagine any such thing. Everything has a physical referent. When you draw the nose of a grasshopper or the nose of a tiger, it's different than that of other noses. So what you call original is really not original. It's based on a less known referent. Is that clear? Whatever you call original is a lesser known referent. Now if you ask the writer where he got the ideas from, he says, I don't know, it just came to me. He may not know where it comes from, but it always comes from a physical referent. Nobody invents a bow and arrow that's completely unique and different than any existence. Historically, there's never been a building put up that was unique and that different than something in the organic world which was used as a referent. Even the creative work of most of what you call creative people are based on some referent you're not familiar with. I can go on and cite all different types of reference, but the referent for a ghost is usually semi-transparent being in some sort of gossamer cloth hovering around. Rarely is a ghost shown with an arrow shirt or a particular type of sports jacket. They're usually shown in gossamer cloth because that's the way it's been presented. So whenever you saw an imaginary animal, even that imaginary animal is made of components of other animals or fish, or other animals you may not be familiar with. prehistoric or animals that you've never encountered, but they have encountered it. So even imaginative writing is based on a stimulus which will stimulate people to imagine their own idea, and they don't even do that. They don't imagine their own idea. They have a referent for what they're imagining at the time. Imagination is pulling together unfamiliar reference. Creativity is putting together elements of known elements in unique ways. So whenever people begin to talk about he has a great imagination, they have no idea of what the referent was. Neither does the writer, because he's been so much exposed to so many different concepts that they don't even know where they're drawing from. But if you study the history of any subject, sailboats, aviation, chemistry, you will see the physical referent for the innovation. If you ask the average person, what does innovation mean? He says to innovate, to imagine new things not possible. In the future, it's the compilation of reference of many different forms of which you extract from. That's exactly what creativity is. So the word creativity should be surpassed, and in its place, we have a broad frame of reference to draw from. Rather than imagination, we use a file of many different concepts to draw from. That's why people, when they read books, they make notes on the side to remind them of some reference in that book. Now, if you say that I want to design garments that are very original, well, use no reference, just hang a lot of fabric around. And they consider that imaginative, unique. I would just say that it's a waste of time. It's like gibberish. Garment design or fabric design or clothing design is based usually not upon a reference, upon habits of thought. Military uniforms are based upon past experiences and past concepts of what a uniform ought to be. Uniform means that they will not differ very much. So when I talk of the word imagination, I'm saying broad frame of reference that you draw from. That goes the arts, music, composition, layout is a broad frame of reference that you draw from. Of course, the metaphysician invents his own terms. Even his own terms are not invented. They're from other metaphysical concepts. So even metaphysical concepts are based upon a broad frame of reference. But the metaphysician is not in the habit of telling you the idea came to him on page 44, the shape of tomorrow's world. He doesn't always know where it came from, so he can't tell you, or she can't tell you. And of course they believe that they're getting all that information from the inner self. They believe men and women have an inner self of stored information. And if you only know how to release that from the mind, you will find that that everybody has a broad imagination. You can't release anything from the mind that it has not collected, that it has no frame of reference for. No child was ever born writing his own numbers and his own words. Always used a physical reference. If people did that, you could never build a civilization. If people invented their own words, their own concepts, really, if they were their own, meaning no one else knew about them, they couldn't do anything with it unless they informed other people. So even language is made up of sounds we make, and sounds animals make, and sounds of the wind sometimes suggest a word, and sound of running water. The more you hear, the more noises you hear. Noise is something you can't assimilate, but the sound of running water, the sound of raindrops, the sound of snowflakes gliding down, or the pattern of the snowflakes, or the pattern of a leaf rocking up and back as it comes down to the earth, is a frame of reference. So if you use a word that's completely your own, zababubu, somebody say, what do you mean by that? I said, don't you understand this particular language? They say, no. So they have to tell you what they mean. Otherwise you can't say, I think you mean this or that. Ask them what they mean. So when they use words like imagination, say, what do you mean by imagination? So to imagine, they explain it with another word, but they don't explain what imagination is. Again, so you don't forget, it's unique frame of reference that you get from other books, which gives you a broader frame to look at things with. Now, it's very difficult for people to lock their frame. In other words, when you talk of people of the Middle Ages, if you lock your frame and say at a certain date, 1904, people used to dress this way. At the year of 2027, they might have dressed this way in a certain area. That's locking your frame. You might say airplanes in 1910 looked like this range. This is what airplanes looked like in 1910. That's locking your frame. But if you don't lock your frame, you can wander into any area with less discipline. When I use the term discipline, I mean to account for the statements you make. So there are ways of communicating, but if you say, I don't know how to communicate with a person that had a stroke, why don't you read books on medicine and find out where communication starts, where it stops, what you can use as a reference. Usually the experience of a person is not broad enough to give them a precise way of pointing to the reference that they're using. I would say if a man is down near a stream picking up water with his hands to drink, if he doesn't hold his fingers together, the water will leak between his fingers. By the time he gets it to his mouth, he has very little water. If he has a normal brain, which means not damaged, he will bring his fingers together to prevent leaks. Now, there is such a thing as associative memory. If you see an empty coconut husk where someone drank the juice out, that will suggest to cup fingers. So a person might pick up a coconut shell and fill it with water and drink it and use it as a cup. What suggested that is the cupping of the fingers together. Associative memory does things like that. If you see an animal that looks a certain way and it bites you, you stay away from animals that look that way. You don't say, it looks like the animal that bit me, but it might be very different. That's very rare. We automatically lump things together. All gays are the same. All homosexuals are maladjusted. All normal people believe in the flag in their country. These are statements made without a physical reference. It may be that the majority of people behave a certain way, not because they're the majority, because they've been exposed to very similar values. All soldiers in different nations tend to salute. Now, is saluting a natural movement? No, it's a custom. But the soldiers of the future, being robots, might be mechanisms designed to destroy the opposition, whatever that means. If you can play opposition, if you know what those characteristics are, into the victor could destroy itself. Do you understand what I'm saying there? If you can take a robot and play into that robot the opposition into your equipment, you can lose your own equipment. So the question is it how do you defeat the enemy, or what is an enemy? If you work out what an enemy is, you'll find out it's an invention. It has nothing to do with the real world. It has to do with one nation taking resources away from another, and they're called the enemy because they produce more scarcity. So creativity is the ability to understand where uniqueness comes from, identifying the referent. And if you fail to do that, you will never surpass that stage of development. Here's how it can be taught. If you have children and you say to the child, what is it that you want? I want to be able to make creative airplanes, very different than conventional. Look up the history of aviation. See what they built in the past. Then you can take combinations of different planes and put them together. Without a referent, it's very difficult. If you want to create new stories, say, I wonder how a grasshopper sees the world. I wonder how a bug sees people. And it depends on the size of the bug and where it's at and how much light. I would say a rat sees a human being as a vertical object, very tall, from the ground line. So if you try to imagine how different insects see people, depending on their height, their receptors, if they have 4 eyes, they see 4 images, but their brain blends them together into one image. How do you do that? You look up the study of vision, how it works. You can't imagine the answers to those questions without moving into ophthalmology, or you have to move into visual mechanisms. The more you study in the physical world, the broader your frame of reference. So if you want to be a designer of sailboats, look up all kinds of sailboats, all kinds of different shapes, and see if you can figure out one. And if you don't know how to figure out one, look up the math necessary to figure out how to get the most movement with a minimum sail. That's what your problem is.
How would you make somebody creative in architecture?
By studying.
Can you make a statement out of that?
Not functional. You didn't mention functional. Just creativity means pile things on in any way, which way you want to. That's creativity. Make the building crooked, zigzag, that's creativity. But it's not functional. Functional is where the future must go. And that is to use minimum materials with maximum safety and affordability for people. And minimum wear, minimum maintenance, that's the kind of thing we're really looking for. People say, well, I'm a creative architect. If you make a building crooked and building zigzag, it's original, but it's nothing. It's not about anything. It's a statement you make, I'm not the same as everybody else. So what? You can drink water out of a piss pot, or you can drink water out of a watermelon shell. But there are things that weigh less than a watermelon shell. So creativity is not necessarily good. It could be detrimental to the human race, unless it's functional creativity and if it applies to many different types of people. So when a person says, I would like to be creative, your answer is in what area? Then collect information in that area. So you have a broad frame of reference to draw from. If you want to become creative in architecture, you can study atomic forms, you can study microscopic organisms, you can study seashells, you can study natural nuts, the formation of the shell, you can study natural formations first, then go to work on creativity. But if you start out with, I want to do creative buildings, just put your roof on crooked. That's creative. But functional creativity is making a steady roof that's self-supporting, that doesn't need all the other equipment on top of it. For example, you have to ask questions. What is a roof? It's the cover of a building. What can a roof be? It could be an electric generator. It could be part of the structure. It could be a defense system against the weather. The roof can be many different things. But if you design a roof for heavy snow loads in the tropics, it's a waste of energy. You understand? The roof has to be designed for a given area and a given set of problems. Now, they use the word shelter, meaning a house. But really, isn't a diving suit a kind of a shelter? A man can go deep in the water with his own environment, oxygen, food, and even in space, you have a suit you wear where you can urinate and defecate in the suit, so you don't have to go back in the spaceship. So that's an environment. That's a dwelling. A man lives in the spacesuit when he's out in space. So can you call that a dwelling? Oh no, a dwelling is a house. When you have a fixed idea of what a dwelling is, you're less creative. If you think of a hammer to driving nails in the roof, that's one use of a hammer, but it could make spark if you hit stone with it, with a hammer, and it could start a fire. Or you could sharpen it and can use certain aspects of the hammer as a knife. And the more you know about nature, the more predictability you have. For example, if you know that moss or fungi grows on the north side of the tree, when you're in the forest you can tell where your north is, where south is. If you have eyeglasses, especially if they're thick lenses, you can start a fire. So what are eyeglasses? They say to improve my vision. No, eyeglasses are to be used in whatever context they would serve at the moment. But if you look at eyeglasses as ability to start fire, you don't need matches. You got a magnifying glass. So that magnifying glass will enable you to see things that you cannot see ordinarily. So what is a hammer? What is a knife? What can you imagine a knife can be used for? Now, what is a piece of wire? A piece of wire is nothing unless you're out of fish hooks. You might be able to make a hook out of the wire. But if you know something about fish hooks, you can make back rake on the wire. So when the fish bites it, the hook doesn't come out, it back rakes into the skin. So the more you know about conventional things, the more you can put together. But there are people that do study conventional things that don't put it together. They look at a fish hook as a fish hook, eyeglasses, eyeglass, or whatever you can do with them. You know what I mean? If you look at paper as a starter for a fire, or a page of a book, depends on what context it's in. Everybody can be creative. Everybody can be imaginative. Oh, those are the words you want to use. If they use the same formula or similar formula, collect data on the subject matter you're interested in. The more data you collect, the broader the frame of reference. Not necessarily, but probably. If you want to teach children to be creative, ask them, what can you do with an egg crate? Well, you can put eggs in it, that's number one. Or you can put other objects of value in it. Or you can use it as a wall. Or you can use it as a building form. You know, the more things a kid comes up with, what do you think? What do you think? Get all these kids to participate. And what can you do with the camera? Well, you can do a lot of things other than take pictures. You can take pictures of objects, still objects, insects. You can do many things with the camera, shadows, and you can create, there's what they call chance configuration. A chance configuration is when you're lying down and you look up at the clouds and you say it looks like a mandolin, the clouds, or the clouds look like Abraham Lincoln. If you never saw Abraham Lincoln, that would never occur to you. It would look like Julius Caesar, whatever occurs to you. So a cannibal, when he looks at the clouds, he doesn't say it looks like a Mercedes-Benz. Cannibal can't say that. He can say it looks like the wolf I shot last Saturday. Well, I taught my kids and other children how to be creative by submersing them in a broad frame of reference environment with lots of different things and say, how does a palm tree differ from an oak tree? Well, the branches, the leaves, and they learn to differentiate. But if you say, how does one tree differ from another without naming the tree, they can't differentiate too well. And you say to kids, what would you do if you found a brand new planet, just like the Earth, and you can arrange it any way you want to? How would you arrange schools, buildings, cities? That causes them to question things. But if they use the old frame of reference, I'll build Chicago or Coney Island here, that means they're using a hard frame of reference that they don't have the flexibility. In order to give them flexibility, remind them you can do anything you want to do. What you want to build is a safe world without war, without hunger, how would you do that? How would you build armies that don't kill people? Well, what else can they do? They can inform people. You can have an army of educators. You can have an army of innovators. Do you understand what I mean? But you have an army of soldiers, that doesn't necessarily have a constructive end. So I'm saying there are different ways to educate different people. Different people learn in different ways. A fashion illustrator is not a person that looks for the linear connectivity of events, whereas a mechanical engineer or roboticist looks for the linkage of any system, how it interconnects with other systems, whereas a fashion illustrator or a poet or an artist does not necessarily see the interconnection of things. They just imagine one thing after the other, which goes nowhere in particular. So if you invite artists to participate in a linear system, they don't know how. A linear system means the connectivity of events. If something doesn't turn in a car, it's not going to turn the wheel. And the engineer looks for the engine first as a prime turning mechanism. Another engineer will look for the fuel as the thing that sets the engine in motion. Another engineer will look at the connections to see if they're rigged appropriately. But engineers have a habit of looking for the connectivity of events. In other words, how do you put the roof on a building? Well, you either lift it with a crane or you build it in place. He looks for connectivity. A doctor looks for the connectivity of the diseases he knows about. If he sees you coughing a certain way and he hears certain sounds, he associates it with his medical experience. And if he doesn't have a reference for it, he may go like this or like this. He may make all kinds of movement if he doesn't have a reference, or he may grab a handbook on tropical diseases that are expressed by means of coughing, sneezing, etc. The cough may be deep, hacking, or shallow. In other words, the more he knows about the cough, the more he can equate it to physical events. There are people that study things, but they don't know where to look. Like if you see floating gadgets in front of your eyes, if you look up diseases of the eye, they're called floaters, and that'll tell you a little bit about it. But does it tell you what to do about it? Not necessarily. Then there's what to do about it. And who knows more about it in the country than any other institution? So you look that up. If you have a laptop, if you don't have a laptop and you don't know how to use it, you can't look it up. Or you can look it up in a dictionary. Limited aspects. The more you know about the more things, the more you know what to look up. And the closer you come to predictability. Science is really a method of trying to formulate predictability. In other words, if you see dark clouds over the land, the probability is that rain is accumulating there. Not necessarily, but probability. And if the dark clouds drift over your area and they're very dark, it probably means electrification also, lightning, if you know something about clouds. But if you look at cumulus clouds, you have a different reaction. The closer your reaction is to reality, the saner you are. If your reaction is, the black clouds are there because I've been bad, that is a non-referential statement. Or the black clouds are there because my father was bad, that's non-referential. If you say it's raining to punish me, so I can't take the kids out on a picnic, that's metaphysical projection. Just say, I don't know why it's raining. I don't know enough about the weather to make predictable statements. What scientists really want, they want something. They don't always know what they want. They want predictability. When they see plants growing, they want to be able to look at it and say, that plant doesn't have enough water, and that plant doesn't have enough sunlight, or the weather is not appropriate for that plant. That's what predictability means. When you see a child with certain tendencies, you say he's mean. You don't say, how can I avert those tendencies? Change them. That's what you really want.
Can you discuss how you studied the lives of, like, Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci?
Well, there are many books written, and I got in a lot of bullshit too. It doesn't go into detail, but you can see that Da Vinci talked with people. He talked with people that talked of gears and levers. He could not come up with that without that. Besides, he would not pick ordinary people to associate with. Can you understand that? If you were a box maker, you made boxes in the past, you would associate with people that made boxes. That would enhance your view. But you're not going to associate with people that make kites, unless you're interested in kites. But if you flew kites, many different types, which they did in China, they made enormous kites, so enormous that a man couldn't hold them, so he had to tie them to an anchor point on the ground, because it had so much lift. So the guy would scale up the pipe, the cord, the rope, and it'd be a man carrying kite. You understand that? But nobody looked at it as a man carrying kite. Now if you cut it loose, the kite would go off and blow down. So people that made kites were very curious about other people's kites. And the more different kites you flew, the broader your frame of reference. If a kite did a lot of this, and some kites didn't, they held fast, you try to imitate those kites. That's where you get ideas like dihedral and oscillation. You don't get them until you bang your head against the wall. No one can see the error of their ways unless they encounter non-error systems. You understand that? If you were to cut the tail off a fish, say it had a big tail, if you cut it off, they can't swim as fast. They'll swim the same way, but they won't get very far. So you can say a certain size tail moves the fish at a given area. A certain shaped tail moves the fish better, but that's more sophisticated. Very few people look for the essential mechanism that enables something to be better than something else. They don't always know what they're looking at. You can tell a large object growing in the nose will prevent a person from breathing, but smaller growth all the way along the nose will do the same thing. But people are not conditioned to look at things objectively. The word objectively is a bullshit word. Objectively means without influence. Think about it. He's objective. He's looking at things without influence. You can't look at anything without influence. You're always influenced. You look at a person as a gypsy or an Indian or a Filipino or a Frenchman. You always have a reference you look at them with. That's why you say to a person, "Are you from Holland?" He says, "Yeah." "Are you from Sweden?" "Yeah." So you pick up those different intonations. That's how you say, "Are you Italian?" Because the guy spoke a certain way. If he speaks with a French accent, you say, "Are you Greek?" That means you don't know enough about dialects. Do you understand what I say when I say a man cannot be objective? He cannot set aside his environment and look at a thing objectively. You look at the world as a Frenchman, an American, or a Swede, or a combination, or a world traveler. The word objectivity is, let us be objective rather than subjective. Everybody is subjective. The broader your frame of reference, you know you're locked within the culture. If a person is gay and he meets an anti-gay person, he's going to have problems. If he meets a person that says, "What is gay? What makes you gay? Why do you prefer men over women?" And he listens, he will learn a little more. But if he says a guy is no good, he's gay, or he's full of hate, say, "Why do you hate the Greeks?" Because the Greeks are too egotistical, whatever it is. You can't be objective. Teaching how a person can not set aside their values, you can't do that, but inquire into values. You know what that means? Do you? Inquire into why a person believes the way they do. I'm a Lutheran. If you're not a Lutheran, you're not going to heaven. Why do you think only Lutherans go to heaven? Because on page 54 in the Bible, it says only Lutherans go to heaven. Do you believe every word of the Bible? He says, yes. Then you don't kill? Well, so you have to check them out to see if they correspond with the Bible they pretend to obey.
Just get all the things
You
about
can
creativity.
use a machine gun to cut the branches off a tree, and cut the branches off, or to kill people, or to loosen the ground, or to kill animals. You can. What else? You can use eyeglasses for. The more things a kid can use eyeglasses for, the broader the extraction. But that's everything. Take a picture frame, a globe, everything.
Right.
Everything has to be, what can you do with it, other than what it is? What good is a cane? There's some canes with a sword in them. You ever see them? There's some canes with a gun that you can point across. There's some canes with a poison dart. You stick it in a crowd of people. You stick it in a guy, and he wouldn't even know where it came from. You can poison him, get away with a perfect crime. You understand what I mean? So what can you do with a cane? Well, enormous. If you can get 500 things you can do with a cane, that person is more creative with canes than the other person. But if you look at it as a cane, as an assisting stick for walking, that's limited. That's why anybody, this is the American way of life, is the only way. They have been damaged badly. What's good about the American way of life? What do you consider bad about it? You know, nobody ever considered anything bad about it, except the communists. Ask the communist or socialist or fascist, what do you think of the American way of life? You get a different story than the American. So ask the American what's good about it to get 25 things. Now 25 things of what's bad about it. You never ask them that. Try it sometimes. You see a whole new aspect of human behavior. A liberal is supposed to ask many questions, but they don't even know what the problem is. You know what that means? People can't state the problem. Say, what is the problem? Well, some people just are dumb, or some people are just bad. It's not the problem at all. Those are statements that are empty. You have to tell people when they're not saying anything. The army really needs self-repairing fabrics. They need stitches that automatically stitch torn clothing. That would be very useful for the army. But you ask the army, what do you need? Well, I need no war. That's what I really need. They don't go that far. I need a better machine gun with a laser beam on it. You want to end war. Well, how do you do that? I don't know. That's where the problem is. Let's say we run into a food famine next year, real bad one. I would take grass, cut it up, make soup out of the grass, and mix the grass in with edible food. There are many things we can eat that we've never surveyed, like seaweed soup. You know, in the oceans, many plants, we haven't done surveys. So we can make surplus food. We can make bread with more grass cut up in it. Maybe they're edible parts of a palm tree that we've never surveyed.
Right.
First you have to state about not enough food. What does that mean? Not enough edible food. What does edible mean? That which the body can assimilate. And if you can add something to it that will enable the body to assimilate, that's creative too. If you find food that the body can't assimilate, and if you add certain lemon shells to it, which makes it assimilable. So a lot of research has to be done on preservation of living systems. That's what you're really interested in. You're interested in nutrition and physical degeneration. So you have to know what you're looking for.
You talked about one time if you were trying to survive out at sea and
ship was sinking, you mean?
Women and children first.
Right.
Do you know anything about navigation? Get on the boat. Do you know how to catch fish at sea? Get on the boat. Then maybe women and children. But women and children will starve to death on a boat without a person that knows how to catch food at sea or navigate by the stars. Do you understand? Women and children can't survive. They're parasitic. Children are parasitic unless you worked on them when they were children. I used to do this. I used to tell my kids, if you're in a hotel and catches fire, wet a blanket, crawl on the floor, because smoke rises. If you stand upright, you'll choke to death. That doesn't mean they'll survive a burning building. It means their chances of surviving are greater. So my wife would say, what are you telling him those terrible things for? I understand where she's coming from. I understand what she means by that. But her frame of reference was very limited. My kids said to me, Daddy, can we go to the zoo to look at those animals? I would say yes. Then he'd get anxious and say, when? And I say 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks is to produce more hunger for that vision. Then when you take him to the zoo, if he really shows interest when he's there, not anybody. If you take him to the zoo and he just does everything every other kid does, nothing's going to happen. But if he shows a particular interest in some animal, just look at your watch and say, I have limited time. We have to leave at a certain time. And if he says, this is very interesting, I'd like to look at it more so I'm sorry, we'll have to come back another time. He says, when? Delay it, 2 weeks. But take advantage of the kid's reactions, not just as a formula. You take the kid to the zoo and say, we have to leave, only if he shows interest. And then when he's in his own room drawing pictures and he likes what he's doing, you have to judge that. If he's just drawing pictures and he likes what he's doing, say outside and play. But I like doing this, interrupt him. So he wants to get back to do something creative. But if you let him stay there, he'll still be creative. But he'll be more creative if you interrupt him. Why is that?
Yeah.
Because he's working on something which he hasn't quite finished. And he finds it interesting. You have to observe what he's doing. And if he or she appears to be doing something that's growing, interrupt them. Or you can say, why do you want to stay with it? He said, because I didn't know this and that and the other thing. That's interesting. You can converse with him. Or you can order him out. Depends on where he's at. Or where she's at. So you tell your kids whatever you can tell them that you feel will help them. But also to talk to other kids about it so it strengthens their views. You want to tell kids to share ideas with others. There's a difference between information and relative information. Like a guy gives you information on the planet Venus. All kinds of information. You can't use that. You know what I mean? Who gives a shit whether leaves go inside out on Venus? You can't use that. So that's less relevant information. The information is superfluous to the task. If you got information on food preparation in New Guinea, you're not in New Guinea and you're not preparing food. So the information is superfluous to what you need. You need information relevant to where you're at. Now, if you want to read about the customs of very primitive people 3,000 years ago, it might tell you what you can eat in New Guinea, but if you never go to New Guinea, it's information you can't use. So you have to decide what is relevant information. The Venus Project is not fixed. It's an emergent system. It adapts to whatever conditions are possible and whatever means are possible at the time.